Today I'm going to be talking all about sourcing in perfumery. Now, sourcing is actually one of the most important skills you can have in perfumery, and it's essentially just picking which raw materials you're going to put in your perfume, but there's actually quite a lot to it. So I'm going to show you with some real life examples the different factors that are involved and how to do it. Hopefully by the end of this video you'll understand sourcing a little bit better with what it is and how to do it. And hopefully from that, you'll actually be able to apply that and use it to create better perfumes. So what exactly is sourcing? Well, it's really quite simple. Imagine you have any given raw material or ingredient in perfumery. It could be a natural, for example, something like vetiver, or it could be a synthetic, something like Ice Super. Now, when you have these raw materials, often they are actually produced by different manufacturers to different quality levels. And as such, you'll get a load of different variants of a certain product on the market, but they can actually smell quite different. Now, the reason that this sourcing or sourcing the best one is so important is because you've got to remember, when you're making a perfume, essentially what you get out is a product of all of the different things that you put in to begin with. So it stands to reason that if the things you're putting inside of your perfume are not the best quality, or you haven't selected either the right things or the right quality of thing, then the result that you're going to get out is not going to be as good as it could be. And actually this can make or break a perfume. And perfumers know this. And this is the reason that when you go to a big fragrance company, perfumers spend a lot of time looking for the absolute best quality raw materials. There's a reason that perfumers are happy to pay a lot more for a very good quality of certain, especially naturals, all the things you could think of, things like rose and vetiver. There's a reason that perfumers spend a long time choosing just the right ones. In fact, they'll even go sometimes travel around the world to different places, which sounds pretty fun, right? I would love to do that. But there's a reason that they actually go and do that. It's not all for nothing. And that's because most of the stuff you can buy, for example, pick any essential oil, pick something like vetiver. If you just go online, type up vetiver essential oil, and if you buy the first thing you find on the internet, chances are that's not going to be the best quality stuff. And the reason for that is because most products, especially naturals, things like a lot of essential oils, but also a lot of synthetics as well, a lot of these products are kind of commodity, or let's say mass market things, and they're actually used in various different applications. And while they are often used in fragrances, they're also often used in other applications such as aromatherapy, where the pure quality of the smell doesn't always matter so much. And you've also got to remember, a lot of the fragrances out there, actually most of the fragrance that is out there is not made for fine fragrance or kind of the usual spray-on perfume or aftershave that you're used to. Most perfume is for other products, things like household products or things like cosmetics. And often in these products, the actual pure quality of the fragrance isn't the most important thing. While everyone usually wants to have a nice fragrance, in a lot of products it's simply not cost effective to do it. So usually they're willing to have a fragrance which is nice and then actually have the product be cost effective for whatever application it is. So when you are making a household cleaning product, while you do try to make a nice perfume for it, usually you're trying to buy very cheap aroma chemicals or sometimes cheap naturals, things like pine oil, but usually you don't care that it's the best quality artisanal pine oil in the world, because you're making hundreds of tons of this household cleaning product, and ultimately it's just going to be used for cleaning. So it doesn't need to smell like the next Chanel. So instead, those manufacturers, they're looking for cost-effective, mass-produced pine oil to make it smell less like pine, instead of that really expensive artisanal one. Because if you did that, then a product of cleaning fluid would cost something like £100 or $100, that kind of thing. So because I'm focused on fine fragrance on this channel, and a lot of you guys, most of you guys who watch me are also making fine fragrances, you need to be aware that when you are sourcing your materials for fine fragrance or regular kind of perfume, not all of the stuff you can buy is going to cut it. So this is very important for you when you are at home making your perfumes, or if you have a small brand or anything like that. You need to be able to understand how to source the right or the best quality raw materials, and that will allow you to get ultimately the best results in your perfumes. So when you're sourcing, there are kind of really three main things to think about, and two of those are specific to naturals. So the main thing, which I really think is applicable to both naturals and synthetics, is the supplier and their kind of manufacturing processes. Maybe not so much the supplier, but usually the manufacturer. So every manufacturer of a raw material, either natural or synthetic, is going to have some kind of process. For naturals, usually that's some kind of extraction technique, and they'll have their own parameters, things like temperatures and amounts of times they leave each thing in each stage and all of that kind of thing. But then also for synthetics, even in a lab, when they're doing the reactions to make a certain chemical, they'll have different processes for that as well. So for every time you see a natural, which is simply an essential oil of X, Y, or Z, or a synthetic molecule X, Y, or Z, either way, they will have been made using a specific manufacturing process, but that can be slightly different from a different manufacturer, and therefore, if you buy them from suppliers who sell from different manufacturers, they will often or usually smell a little bit different. So that's the main thing. But also for naturals, you have a couple of other key considerations. One of those is actually the kind of what in French we'd call terroir, and in English that roughly translates to the provenance of a raw material. So you've got to think there are a few different things that contribute to this, but there are things like the actual geographic location. So often things from different countries or different regions in a country can smell quite different, and that's because the plant will have different amounts of rain, different soil conditions. It may be a slightly different subspecies. It may have other things or interacting species in the environment around it, and all of these different daylight lengths, all of this stuff can cause it to grow slightly differently and produce, different leaves, different fruit, or develop a bit differently. So there's that. And then quite relatedly, actually, because, plants always can grow a bit differently depending on the year or the season or this and that, you'll also get different batches. So one batch of lavender essential oil produced by, a certain farm 1 year could actually smell quite different from another batch produced the next year or something like that. And then finally, there's also kind of, another kind of point, which is you can also get different extraction techniques for different naturals. So certain things you can have, for example, both an essential oil or an absolute, though I guess that is a little bit different because they are technically different products. So it's, not one of the big three. Anyway, here I have a selection of some different things to go and illustrate these concepts to you. So actually a lot of these are for some sourcing I'm doing at the moment, which is actually why it was a good time to make this video, because I'm currently trying to stock some more raw materials for my online store, the Fragrance Foundry, and some of these will be used in my own perfume brand as well. So by the way, if you're in the UK and you're looking for raw materials, definitely go and check out my online raw materials store, the Fragrance Foundry, down in the link in the description below. And we will be shipping hopefully to Europe soon as well. Anyway, to start off with then, let's look at something here, which is cardamom, because I've got some different cardamom oils, and this will kind of illustrate quite well why the exact same, let's say cardamom essential oil, but produced by different manufacturers from different regions and things like that, can have very different results. So I've got 3 cardamom essential oils here and 1 CO2 extract, which is actually a slightly different product because it's made through a slightly different process. So the first one is an economy, what I call an economy cardamom oil. This is kind of more like your mass market. If you go online, you type in cardamom essential oil, most of the brands pretty much that you find will be selling one form or another of this, and this can actually be a little bit regardless of price. What I will say as a general rule is if something is very, very cheap, it's usually low quality. However, if it's expensive, it doesn't guarantee that it's good quality, because you get a lot of brands who just take the cheap stuff and put a fancy bottle on it and then try to sell it as if it were some kind of premium product. So there's this economy cardamom oil. And next here we have 2 different cardamoms from highly respected French manufacturers. So these are samples, from the kind of, let's say, well-respected French companies that actual real kind of perfumers use for their top quality fine fragrances. Now in this video, I'm not going to name any of the names of the suppliers because I've talked a lot in past videos about various different suppliers and which ones I like more and which ones I like less. The point in this video is really to teach you how to do that process yourself, and I don't want to I don't want the lesson that you come away from this video with to simply be that this supplier is better than that one, or, you know, badmouth a certain supplier and say that their products aren't good. The point is to kind of illustrate the general concept. Okay, so let's start off with the economy or the cheap cardamom. So this one does smell like cardamom, for sure. And, you know, for a lot of applications, if you wanted just a cardamom smell, then this is the cheap stuff and you can go and do that with it. So especially in any kind of big mass-produced product, or something where, you know, you need a large amount of fragrance and the product's at a cheaper price point, absolutely fine. But now if we go and compare it to the two French manufacturers, well, they start to smell a little bit different. Now, on the face of things, you know, in a broad sense, they all smell similar in the sense that they all smell of cardamom. But when you go through them one by one, immediately what you notice is the two high quality French manufacturers, they are more kind of deep, they have more depth to it, more complexity, they're more spicy and refined. And they're a little bit more woody, whereas the cheap one is more what I would call terpenic, and it's more oily. And this is often something that's quite indicative of lower quality essential oils. They can often smell terpenic and oily. These are kind of off notes, usually indicative of kind of lower quality stuff going in to begin with, and poorer production processes, essentially where, for example, there's too much heat, or this or that, or stuff is not, you know, the manufacturing essentially is not so good. And when you smell into this, quite quickly that smell from the cheap one, the actual cardamom, within only a couple of minutes has already started to evaporate quite quickly. Whereas the other two, they are holding their kind of deep, spicy richness much, much better over time. Between the other two, one is brighter and more citrusy, and one of them is kind of deeper and more woody. And one of them is from Guatemala and one of them is from India. So even though these two companies probably have a lot better of a manufacturing process, you can still see that there may be some difference between that, but also actually the provenance, the country, is also having a fair amount of an effect on the smell as well. So in this case, the one from Guatemala is more lemony and citrusy, and the one from India is deeper and spicy and more woody. Now I prefer that one. For me, that's the one that I would purchase. However, it depends on you and your taste and the project. If you're making a citrusy perfume, or, you know, that's what you're looking for, or you actually just prefer that kind of version of cardamom, then you may well go for the Guatemalan one. If I go back now to the economy one again, actually the cardamom smell has gone quite a lot. It does still smell a little bit of cardamom, but what it actually smells like now is something called lindenol and alpha terpineol. These are synonyms for the same thing, but that's actually a very cheap synthetic molecule. And based on the fact that this smells so much of alpha terpineol, I wouldn't be surprised if this like economy cardamom oil was actually adulterated with some of the alpha terpineol, which may sound a little bit seedy, but it's actually been well known for decades and decades that something that essential oil manufacturers frequently do is adulterate their essential oils with certain cheap synthetic aroma chemicals in order to kind of dilute down the cost a little bit. And, you know, they won't tell you that they're doing this, but unfortunately it is one of those practices that is kind of probably still fairly widespread. So as you get better at a perfumer and you firstly understand some of the smells of these synthetics that could be used as adulterants more, but also as your nose, you know, gets better at telling the difference, distinguishing between things, you're more and more likely to actually notice this going on. But the way that they often train apprentice perfumers professionally is they like to give them the best quality raw materials first, and that's because they want student perfumers to learn what the thing should smell like, ideally, before going to necessarily learn different qualities and things like that. So that was those three, and then we've also got the CO2. So the CO2 extract is actually a different product. It's produced via a different manufacturing process. So when you're sourcing for a particular project, you may not only want to source which version, say, of an essential oil you want, but you may actually decide for certain naturals, if there's an essential oil and an absolute and a CO2 extract, you may decide, well, which one of those extracts do you need? So the CO2 extract, on the other hand, and this one's my favorite, this one is, it's kind of more, I find it more rich and kind of spicy, and it's it's again got this deepness, but I would say it's got less other notes. For example, I haven't got any oily or terpenic or woody or lemony notes. It really does have a nice kind of, let's say, true soft, spicy cardamom smell. So I really, really like the CO2 extract. So my decision for my sourcing is going to be probably something between either getting my favorite essential oil or the CO2 extract, or potentially both. Depends. We'll see what the budget permits. Okay, so next we're going to look at the same thing for a synthetic. So here I've got amyl salicylate, which is a very common synthetic raw material, and I've got one from a higher quality manufacturer, and then I've also got a cheap kind of quality one, which if you just go and search Google amyl salicylate and look for the cheapest one, is probably more similar to what you'll get then. And again, it's a similar story. So they both smell like amyl salicylate, and if you don't know what that smell is, it's a little bit tricky to describe. To me, it's kind of like a dusty, kind of slightly violety smell. It's a bit of an abstract smell, that one. It's often used, for example, in things like clover, accords and fougères and things like that. Anyway, the difference between the two is when you smell the cheap one, it kind of smells like amyl salicylate, but when you smell the high quality one, it suddenly smells a lot more strong and rich. That similar smell, but it suddenly sings a lot more, and it's just louder. It's more pronounced. It almost smells as if the cheap one has been diluted down, or it's got some other stuff in there that's kind of muddying it up and not allowing the smell to be as clear as possible. The nice quality one is just like this crisp, fresh version of the amyl salicylate smell that really kind of jumps out at you, whereas the cheap one, kind of, you have the amyl salicylate smell in there, it's not as pronounced. You have to kind of smell it more and it doesn't jump out at you. And that is important because in a perfume, if you're using amyl salicylate, you may have to use 3 times as much as the cheap one to get some kind of comparable effect or something like that, or you may just not be able to. So, especially in a perfume formula where you've only got so much space, you really want each little kind of part of your formula to be doing the best job it can. So, much better to have a little bit of very kind of high quality amyl salicylate that's really going to give all the nice crisp effects you want in the formula, than trying to dump a load of this economy stuff in to compensate for its kind of lack of doing a good job. Now suddenly your perfume formula is gunked up full of other stuff and you don't have much space left to actually build out all the other parts you need for it to do well. So again, there are lots of examples of aroma chemicals like this. For example, I've also got methyl pamplemousse here, and you've got the proper one, which is manufactured by Givaudan. This is kind of the main company who makes like a nice quality, what they call methyl pamplemousse. There is the same molecule that's actually marketed as a slightly different name. In this case, it's called grapefruit acetar, but it's the same chemical. And this one is just made off-brand by some kind of generic manufacturer, and then it's sold lots cheaper. But the difference is that this one, the cheap one, smells a lot more like really cheap washing up liquid kind of smell, whereas the actual methyl pamplemousse smells more like how it's meant to smell, which is this nice woody grapefruity smell. The cheap one still has this nice woody grapefruity smell, but it's got this much more kind of synthetic, cheap kind of aspect to it. So if you're going to use that in a perfume because you want to create some kind of grapefruit top note or something, then I'm sure you can imagine just using the nice one instead of the cheap one is going to be the difference between your perfume having a nice kind of refined grapefruit top note versus a cheap synthetic-y smelling top note. Okay, so next we're going to go through another example, and this one is going to be labdanum. Now I did a video, probably getting on for 3 years ago now, where I was sourcing some labdanum absolute. Now you can go back and watch that video to see an example of me doing this whole sourcing thing. But at the time I compared 6 different, I believe, labdanum absolutes, and I found one which was my favorite, and then I decided to go and purchase that, which I was using for a perfume for my brand, and that's also now available on the Fragrance Foundry. Now I pretty much run out of that labdanum absolute, so I was going to restock it. And what I loved about that labdanum absolute was, firstly, it wasn't the darkest ever, so it didn't discolor, it didn't make the perfume too dark, but it had this beautiful honeyed kind of top note. It had this lovely sweet opening, which I felt some of the others didn't have. Now, I've just gone and asked them for a sample of their new labdanum because I thought, okay, I'll probably just go then and restock the labdanum from that same company and go and get a new batch. Unfortunately, I received a sample from them a few weeks ago, and what I found is, sadly, their new batch of labdanum this year, to me, it doesn't really meet the same kind of quality expectations that I had from the previous batch. Because the previous batch, I thought this was really good. I've got the sample here from the new batch, and firstly, it's darker in color. So you can see that difference pretty clearly. And that on its own isn't really the end of the world. But what I was more disappointed with is that the smell, to my nose, on the new one, in the top note, it just hasn't got that same kind of, that same sweetness, that same honeyed kind of note that I really liked from before. It still smells nice, don't get me wrong. And it's not a bad labdanum, but it doesn't have, I feel, that same magic that particular batch had. So, this is probably just because they use a different crop this year. They told me that the manufacturing process was actually exactly the same. So that means now, to restock the labdanum, I'm not necessarily going to go and buy this same stuff again. I've actually got some other samples here from different companies, and what I'm now going to do in the coming weeks is to actually find a labdanum that I think matches this old one I had as close as possible, and then I'll go ahead and restock that. So that was just an example of where the actual batch can differ, even if the company and the manufacturing process is the same. For whatever reason, one year the crops were different or something like that, and it affected the quality of the product. Okay then, so one final example I've got here, and in this case I'm actually looking to stock some rosemary essential oil, and that's mostly because it's something I use in my online course, so I want to make sure people have got a place to get it. So I've got quite a selection of different rosemary oils here. Firstly, let's go with the economy one, because this is the standard one. If you were to go online and just type in rosemary essential oil, this is probably most likely the kind of thing that you pick up. So this, I go to smell it, and it does smell a bit like rosemary. And like I said before, it's similar to the cardamom. In some applications, this would be absolutely fine. But it's got a kind of sweet pine, slightly plasticky note to it. And it's quite camphoraceous, and this is common with cheaper essential oils. They've often got this harsh, kind of aggressive, camphoraceous, or like minty, let's say, aspect to them. So next I've got 3 different samples actually from a really well-respected, high-quality French company. So we're going to start off with their Tunisian rosemary, and I've actually got 3 different provenances, let's say, of rosemary. So their Tunisian rosemary, this one smells already very different from the economy rosemary that we just tried. You can actually tell these two just by comparing them. The economy one is very sharp now, it's very camphoraceous. Like I say, it's got that minty smell. The other one is a lot more refined. It's a lot more close to the smell of real rosemary. It's more herby, more woody, deeper. Next then we have the same company, but this time their Spanish rosemary. And when I go and smell that, I can actually smell already that it's different from the Tunisian rosemary. So the Spanish one, I actually don't like it so much. Even though you can tell it's got that higher quality level of manufacturing, it doesn't have all that sharp, it's not quite as sharp as and camphoraceous, that kind of thing. It's actually got what I would call a spirane note, which is hard to describe, but it's a bit more of a musty, let's say slightly sulfurous side note to it. And if you've ever smelled something like affirmate, it reminds me a little bit of that. So that's quite unusual. That's not something I would have expected. But maybe this crop of Spanish rosemary they had this year gave that specific kind of note. So that's not something I like so much. Now again, we've also got their Moroccan rosemary. When I smelled this, I thought, wow, this is just the perfect one. Because this one, when I smelled that, it reminds me exactly of what I wanted from rosemary, which is like kind of, the smell of when you're doing like a roast dinner and you've got loads of rosemary cooking around potatoes or chicken or something like that. It gave me that really nice, realistic kind of complex rosemary with just that kind of realism to it that gave me that feeling I wanted. And when you go and compare that even to the Tunisian one, which was not too bad, actually they're quite different. And I feel that in comparison to that, the Tunisian now smells more camphoraceous and it's sharper, whereas this Moroccan one is really lovely. It pretty much just gives you that nice realistic rosemary smell, and I don't think we're really going to get any better than that. So that's an example of, even within one company, how just different countries or different provenances of the actual herb that went into it can give very different results. But then as well as that, we've also got different companies. So I've actually got another fairly well-respected manufacturer of rosemary. This one, to me, it's not as nice as that Moroccan rosemary. And I would actually say it's quite comparable to the Tunisian rosemary that we had from before. But then again, when you smell them next to each other, there are still differences that you notice between them for sure. And then as well as that, as well as just the essential oil, which we've been looking at, like I said before, there are different products. So in this case, I've got something which is a lot more unusual, and this is actually rosemary absolute. So this is this time a different extraction process, and this is not a common raw material. Normally rosemary is used as an essential oil, but I managed to get this absolute, and this, you know, really intrigued me because I thought this is quite a cool raw material. When you dip it on the scent strip straight away, it doesn't immediately give you that rosemary smell that comes and jumps out at you like in the essential oils. It's a little bit more subtle to begin with. It's not quite so impressive. It's just a bit more herby, kind of a bit more of a herbal smell. However, this one is actually more of a mid note, unlike the essential oils, which is very much a top note. This rosemary absolute creeps more into the mid note, and its beauty really comes out when you actually leave it to dry down. So like I said, this is not so much sourcing the same raw material, because it's actually technically a different raw material because it is a different extraction process. But if you're sourcing a rosemary in general, then yeah, you may be wanting to look at the different rosemary products you could get, right? And I guess that's the point. So this, when you leave it to dry down after 10 minutes or so, something opens out into this lovely kind of, I would say a bit longer lasting, but a nice, still realistic kind of rosemary, kind of herbal background kind of smell. So if I was really working on a rosemary note in a perfume, I could use this rosemary absolute in combination with one of those essential oils to actually reconstruct a more complete rosemary profile that could then go all the way from the top and then carry through into the mid region. So that's really what this would be for. It would be for preserving rosemary longer, you know, making it last longer in a perfume and actually augmenting the overall. If I really wanted to build a perfume around rosemary, I'd probably be using both. Or maybe this raw material has a more subtle effect of maybe some kind of accord which would work with rosemary but doesn't want it shouting out so much right at the beginning. So this is interesting too. So maybe I'll get a little bit of this. I'm not sure. I think it's quite cool because it's unusual. So anyway, that is pretty much how I do my sourcing, how I source. Like I said, it's a very important skill in perfumery to be able to source your raw materials. The biggest takeaway, really, I would say, to get from this video, if you are starting out at home, especially if you don't have so much experience, you probably aren't going to have the resources to go and try out, you know, like 5 different types of each essential oil. So the best advice I can give you, at least to start with, is to find suppliers which have a very good reputation inside of the kind of, let's say, perfumery community, because you know at least from them that it's very likely you're going to be getting a good quality raw material. So I've talked about different suppliers in previous videos, so go and check out some of those if you want to know my thoughts on who's good. But likely if you're just buying random stuff off the internet, you're much more likely to end up with lower quality stuff without realizing it, and that can be a shame, especially if a raw material you think, oh, it's not very nice. It's sometimes because actually you've just got a low quality version, but if you just smelled a really nice version, it can be a world apart, and that could completely change what you think of that raw material. So anyway, hopefully you found this somewhat interesting or somewhat useful, and good luck with your own sourcing, your own raw materials for your perfumes. So I'll see you very soon with another video, and until then, have a good time.